Geoff McCabe, pleasure that you're here today at the 8th annual VirtualCon. I'm actually particularly excited about this talk. I'm being a comic fan myself, and I know a lot of our audience are as well. We've got a lot of fans in the audience too, so they're particularly excited about this talk. So you and I are going to have a conversation today about tokenized lore and what that is all about.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I've been a VR fan even longer than I've been in crypto and blockchain. And of course, I think like a lot of nerds and geeks, we always wanted to have something like a metaverse to play in. And so it's been fun watching it all unfold. You know, when the Oculus Rift was announced, it was such a big, important day for many of us. Like finally, we're going to have something cool to start playing around in. And now it's like a decade later. It just keeps getting better, but it's still far from what we want, what we really want. And it's the idea of tokenized lore has a lot to do with how we build that together, and what that really means, and moving from the old paradigm of the way entertainment is spoon-fed to people by big corporations into something that people are participating and building together and taking ownership of that. So that's really what tokenized lore is about, and it's something that makes a lot of sense for the future and is a great use case for blockchain.
Awesome. But before we get into all that, number one, I'm gonna go off camera because I have like 5 screens around me, so I'm always looking because we're streaming live in 2 metaverses. We're in Classic, we're in Beta, we're in the new Xeon, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitch, we're everywhere. So I'm taking questions and comments from everywhere. So I'm going to be looking around. So it's very distracting.
Okay.
Plus, I want everybody to see you on the big screen. And then just before we get into it, you'll still be able to hear me. But before we get into it, I want you to introduce yourself. Let's start with that. Let's go with that. Who is Geoff McCabe? And tell us a little bit about what you're cosplaying today too.
Okay, well, you can see if you look here, this guy, I'm cosplaying this guy, one of the characters from the comic book that we're releasing in 2 or 3 weeks. But my name's Geoff McCabe. I'm originally a physicist. I have a master's degree in physics, but after I got my degree, I decided I didn't want to work in physics, and I started a company and ended up doing design. So I had a company doing jewelry and gifts in China. We had a pretty big business with about 1,000 employees. We sold different types of jewelry and gifts all over the world, and clothing. I was in Bali a lot, designing stuff there. I was in India, the Philippines, Korea, all over the place. And after 11 years of doing that, I was very early in China, one of the first sort of people to go there. And many of the places I went, I was the first like white person anybody had ever seen there. So sometimes crowds would gather just to look at me. But we had a factory there, and it was an amazing time. But after 11 years, I decided to sell my half of the business to my business partner. I was living in Seattle at the time, and I moved down to Costa Rica. So that was 20 years ago. So for the last 20 years, I've been living in Costa Rica. I started a real estate company and founded an eco village, and I have a yoga center now. So I have a yoga center called Anamaya that is rated one of the top 20 best sort of small boutique yoga resorts in the world. So I'm very interested in health and mental health, physical health, but I also was, a geek at heart and wanted to do stuff with comics and metaverse and stuff. And so when the Oculus Rift came out, I got really excited. I was doing all this stuff in the jungle, and I was, co-founder of a wildlife sanctuary and stuff. But as soon as the Oculus Rift was announced, I sort of decided, I'm going to get back into tech. I'm kind of bored of all this jungle stuff, even though I love living in Costa Rica. So I started a blog called virtualrealitytimes.com, and it became one of the biggest sort of VR metaverse blogs. It's been going around 10 years, and I just checked yesterday, we have over 2,700 handwritten articles. They're not AI written articles. They're real articles written over 10 years now for a long time. And so I've been very deeply embedded in the metaverse. Now, for the last 7 years, I got more involved in blockchain, and I founded a cryptocurrency that became a top 60 coin for a while, in the top 100. We partnered with La Liga, the football league, second biggest football league. We were the official cryptocurrency wallet of La Liga. And yeah, so I've just done all this stuff in tech ever since then, and really interested in blockchain. And before NFTs were called NFTs, and anybody heard of Bored Apes and all that stuff, I was working with one of the people I hired was the lead developer of Namecoin, which created the first NFT in the world before NFTs were applied to images. And so we started talking even back then about, oh, maybe we could use this for comics, because Marvel and DC were talking about the problems of printing and how they were losing money, and maybe they weren't going to keep doing this forever. They're making so much money off of their movies. They're thinking, why do we want to print all these comics? They lose money every year. And people were freaking out in the comics industry. And I thought, oh, we could make them digital and make them collectible with this non-fungible token thing. It wasn't even called NFTs at the time. So I started thinking about doing that, and I decided to call it Lightning Works, because I was thinking to base it on the Lightning Network of Bitcoin. And that's evolved over time, but the name stuck. I really liked the name Lightning Works, and it was kind of like DreamWorks with lightning instead. So about 4 years ago, I started working full time just on the comics part. And so I've, going through this, I've been working, like 100 hours a week for 4 years straight, and learned how to write comics. I always wanted to write when I was young. I was not good at it. But as I got older, I got a lot better. And I really studied like how to write good stories, how to write good villains, how to write good heroes, cliffhangers, just all this kind of stuff. There's experts. It's so wonderful on YouTube. You can go on and learn from experts how to do this well. And it really upgraded my writing, learning how to create good characters, all this kind of thing. And so I started writing comics. So we have about 20 different comics in production right now. And a little over a year ago, I met Kevin Rose, who's the CMO of Alien Worlds. And they ended up funding us to do a comic book series for them, and now a video game that we called Starblind. So I wrote the series, and the idea was, they had this sort of metaverse idea, although they don't actually have a metaverse. Their metaverse is more philosophical. It's all about the lore. It's all about the characters. It's about the world they're building and creating this underlying layer of value using cryptocurrencies. And so I've actually mentioned them many times, like, oh, we should actually build a real metaverse using one of the Otherverse sovereigns, right, for Alien Worlds, because they're pretty well funded, and they're one of the top blockchain, or they were the number one blockchain game for 2 or 3 years, and along with like Axie Infinity. And so the CMO of Alien Worlds came up with this idea of tokenized lore. And so when we met, we started talking about it. And I didn't know the name, but I was working on the similar idea. And basically, we both believed the same thing, and we became friends. We were very excited about this idea of how people can own part of a story or part of a universe that they're creating together with the founders of it. So a good example might be Worlds of Warcraft, where people spend this huge amount of energy to build these realms within somebody else's game, and then they have this battle with the founders who don't want them selling things, and they don't want real money involved because it could be violating a law somewhere that you're not allowed to have real transactions. You can't sort of break this barrier between games and the real world, and that's kind of what blockchain solves. But the idea with that is that people in like Worlds of Warcraft are building these stories together. They're creating these universes, but they don't own any of it, right? You can't really, you can get your castle, you can build your guilds, create all this stuff, but at the end of the day, World of Warcraft is owned by a corporation somewhere, and you don't have any share of that. And so the idea of tokenized lore is, how do you use tokens to change that? So that a good example, I think, is Star Wars, because Star Wars, was around for decades, and then George Lucas decided to sell it to Disney, and Disney has basically ruined Star Wars. And so I always pose a question to people like, well, what if instead of selling Disney and all the rights to it, selling Star Wars to Disney, what if instead he had decided to sell it to the fans, or sell a token to the fans that allowed them to co-develop the IP? So for example,
that would have changed everything. Sorry, I had to just jumped in there. Like, yeah, that would have
Yeah,
completely changed everything.
he could have probably sold 1 million tokens for $1,000 each. I think he got like 2 or 3 billion, but Disney ruined, it's basically ruined Star Wars, and nobody cares about it anymore. Instead, if he had 1 million people co-creating and expanding that universe, it would have now been the biggest entertainment thing in the world, and he would have ended up making a lot more money, and there would have been 1 million people promoting it and creating their own stories, creating their own comics, creating their own characters, and working together to sort of build this. And so Alien Worlds had that idea, and I had the same idea. And when I heard the idea of the name Tokenized Lore, I said, you know what, I'm going to go with that name. That's a great name for it. So both Kevin and I now have become like just people always talking about Tokenized Lore, because this whole NFT thing came along in the middle of all this and kind of very much tainted the name of NFTs, right? So people think of NFTs as sort of Bored Apes and other stuff that rips people off, and people don't understand any of it. The technology is really great. It's really useful for a metaverse or something like this. It can be used in so many different ways outside of apes and images. But it's very good for tokenized lore. So for example, you could think of one way to do it that we're working on is thinking of it like a Kickstarter. So you have this idea for a story. Instead of going and giving 20% to Kickstarter and having them do it that way, you could sell a whole bunch of tokens, and those people that get the tokens have a share somehow in the universe you're building. And so, for example, you could pitch, say, hey, this is my idea for a universe. I'm going to write all these stories. I want get a couple hundred people that love this universe that are going to create stories with me. And it's kind of like what I'm doing with Starblind at the Alien Worlds. They've hired me to basically write the Star Wars trilogy of Alien Worlds, and then so I'm basically telling their lore through the eyes of these characters and telling the story, bringing the characters and lore to life. And then the idea is other people, once they read these comics and play our game that we're building and all this, then they can come in and, using what Alien Worlds has built, create their own characters. And so they could do things like, and I've actually, petitioned to their community and said, hey, if you have a really good idea for a character, tell me now, because I'll write that character into the comic. It's like a side character. It could be sitting in a bar. It could be a single word, that is exchanged, but then they can take their character and branch off. And it's a really interesting idea, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done in how to make this viable, because stories are very appealing to people when things make sense, when there's a lot of continuity and there's a lot of consistency. So if you're creating a world, you have to set your rules, and you need everybody to follow those. So for example, in Alien Worlds universe, there's no magic, right? Everything is based on this idea of Trillium. And so they have like rules, and they basically built an AI that you can talk to ask questions and say, hey, what are the rules? This is my idea. And they're basically building a DAO where people can be part of the DAO and can then help people that want to submit scripts or ideas, say, hey, this is my script. Do these ideas violate the universe in some way? And you end up having to sort of create a Bible for this universe. Can people travel faster than light? Well, if you can't travel faster than light, well, can information go faster than light? Because these things are important for consistency. And people like universes a lot more when they're consistent. And so you have to kind of answer all these questions, and then you have to have a way to kind of create a government to decide what stories that other people are creating are canon. Are they sort of legally part of this universe, or are they not? And then you talk about how people can, split commissions, or do people buy a license? There's a lot of different ways to do it. And I think in the future, many experiments are going to be going on where people try to figure this out. Now, in the context of something like a metaverse, this makes a lot of sense, because people like, I've talked to, the team at Otherverse many times. I'm an advisor to Otherverse, and I've talked about, I really believe that people want to create stories and universes in the metaverse. They don't want to just go to meetings and go to discos and sort of hang out. They want to create stuff, right? And if they're going to spend all this time creating stuff, they want to get paid for it, or at least they want that option, and it's very difficult to do that in sort of a lot of the video games today. There's people who do all these mods, for example, modding of video games, but they don't generally get paid for it. So we know that people have this desire to do it, but the question then is, how do you pay them? Who pays them? And how do they use the brand? You're allowed to use their logo. All these kind of questions come up. There's all this legal aspect. And in the metaverse, like Otherverse, one of the things I think that's going to happen with Otherverse is that, there's going to be these sovereigns, right? And people can get their own sovereign. But somebody might say create a sovereign that has a certain sort of world to it, like say, okay, this can be sort of a Dungeons and Dragons type of thing. And they want anybody that's building stuff in their sovereign to stick to certain rules. So they're going to have some sort of DAO or some sort of committee of lords or whatever you want to call them that kind of make sure that people are sticking to the big vision of whoever has created this. And if people do, then they can basically build this thing together and everybody can make money, because you'll be able to create experiences that people can come in, like mini games or whatever. People will be able to come in and play your thing or watch the 3D movie in the metaverse that you've created with NPCs, or there's all this kind of cool stuff that's going to be coming along as AI sort of gets more embedded within the metaverse. And there's going to be so many avenues for creativity, and people are going to want to be able to monetize that. And if they're able to monetize it and make money, then they'll spend more time doing it. It won't just be something they do as a hobby. It's something they can do full time. And I think most people I talk to, especially creatives and artists, I mean, a lot of people, that's their dream. Like, they don't necessarily want to be a George Lucas where they're become a billionaire, but they would really like to not have to work at a bank. And they'd like to just be able to make enough money that they can be creative and build their worlds and create their characters. So, very modest goals, and so I think that's what the one of the biggest things about tokenized lore that we think is very important is to just find a way for people to make a living so they don't have to do their day job. I could talk all day, so maybe you want to ask a question or interrupt me.
I'm just listening. I'm enjoying this. Actually, I had a question that came in from the audience, and it was from back in the intro portion, and I'm just going to ask it. And the question is, well, two questions actually. The first one is, do you find your history with science has an effect on the art that you make?
Oh yeah, yeah, like just today, for example, in one of the comic books, one of the artists that works for us, her name is Ana Paula Martello. She drew for Marvel Black Panther and Scarlet Witch comics, and we have a vampire series called Anastia. I think Anastia is actually in one of these characters behind me, or she's just off camera this way. But basically, she drew she drew a scene where a bullet goes through our vampire character and ends up in the chest of the hero. And so there's this little fairy that goes in and pulls the bullet out, and so she drew it, and she's holding up the bullet, right? And the bullet's still in its jacket. The way she drew it, it's still in the jacket, right? And I had to explain to her, it's not just gonna be like the jacket like goes out of the gun, like she doesn't know, right? She's an artist, but she doesn't know how guns work, right? But then I started thinking about it. I was like, well, would the bullet be damaged? So I actually went and looked up, like, what happens if a bullet hits a person? What does it look like? So I did all this sort of research, looked online. I found out, like, in that kind of case, the bullet would be kind of spread apart and stuff. So I sent her a picture of, like, this is what a bullet looks like, well, after it's been fired and pulled out of somebody, and so she just showed she had to redrill it. So yes, I'm very scientifically minded, and I want things to make sense in that kind of way. So that's kind of an example of how my sort of science background, like, literally just forces me to, like, make things logical, and people like it. A lot of people that read this stuff are nerdy, and they know science, and they want things to be logically consistent. And I'm pretty obsessive compulsive about trying to get things right. Sometimes I just wave my hands and say, oh, well, it's, we'll explain that later. But most of the time I try to get things right by physics.
Well, it's attention to detail, and I know that fans can really appreciate that. And I know that people that are in our metaverse as well, in Otherverse, they definitely appreciate the attention to detail. They're of that ilk. So they speak your language. They can
Yeah.
appreciate that. The next question that came in, I'm going to ask this right now, and then we can keep chatting about tokenized lore, is DC or Marvel? I have to ask that right away.
It's funny. When I was a kid, I love comics, and then somebody showed me early X-Men of Chris Claremont, and they completely changed my life. This is like 1980, 1981, and I realized how amazing comics would be, and so I became a big Marvel fan at the time because I always thought Superman was cool. I watched at that time, like if you wanted to watch cartoons, the only time you could watch cartoons was Saturday morning. That was it, right? There's no VHS, there's no internet, there's no way to rent a DVD. There was just you had to wait for it to come on TV, and there would be like Superman, or after. Actually, there were some in the afternoon as well, and so I like DC, but you did feel a pressure as a kid, like to pick a side, like you had to pick Marvel or DC, and you were kind of uncool if you like both of them. I was like, why do I have to choose? I like both of them, So, and I did have some comics. For the most part, though, I like Marvel. I thought Marvel comic the stories were better. I recognized as a kid, like I remember going to my mom, she was a Pulitzer nominated poet, and like English professor and all this, and trying to get her to read the Chris Claremont X-Men, and she just like poo-pooed it, and she liked comics when she was a kid, but she had no idea like how good comics had become, and those were like the best comics that were ever written until then and since still, the sort of whole Chris Claremont run of X-Men was so great, and it changed the world of comics and storytelling. So that really affected me and made me have a deep love for Marvel and the characters and Stan Lee and all that. So, but I don't really choose a side. There was definitely some DC comics I loved.
Yeah, good answer. Good answer. If I was forced to choose, absolutely forced. I was raised on Justice League, so I have to say,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's if I was forced. Strong force. So
yeah.
circling back to the community, and this is the thing I really like about what you were talking about, in regards to and this is something that we've touched upon in other sectors of the sessions that we've had, is how important the community is to Otherverse, and how much the community has helped to build and shape Otherverse. And this is something that's really I'm hearing when it comes to the tokenized lore, and I'd like you to sort of speak a little bit more about that, and you know
Well, so the
how
metaverse,
go for it. Yeah.
I mean, the real thing about community in all of these things is about niches. Right. I have a daughter who's 18, and I asked her, like, what do kids want, And she explained to me exactly what kids want. She's very analytical, very smart girl. And she said kids love to sort of geek out on anime and stories and unusual things. And they really want to find people all over the world that share that same love for that geeky thing. And so for her, so we talked a lot about it, and I came to the realization that it's really about being able to create, things like Reddits, right? Like a Reddit is a good example. Somebody starts a Reddit, they kind of um, become a mod for it, and a lot of people it kind of catches on this idea, and it becomes a community of people that visit every day. And so I think Otherverse will be the same thing, and that's why, like, I think Otherverse's idea of sovereigns is so important, is because I think it's big enough you can have your own side world where everybody can participate. But until then, it's all about creating space for people that love your thing, whatever that is, can come and talk about it. So she gave me an example of, she with anime, people all of a sudden discover this anime that's been around for 30 years, and it's like the coolest thing to them. To them, it's brand new, right? That happens to me like all the time, right? I discover somebody mentions a really good anime I've never heard of, and it turns out every time there's a whole bunch of fans of it, and so you can go online somewhere and find that. And so I think that in 3D, sort of in a 3D environment, is just a more powerful way of getting together. And so I think that's one of the most important things for metaverse and for community, is not like the overall community, but these niche communities around some sort of shared passion.
Got you. So how does one get started in something like this? How do you get started?
in like the tokenized lore concept?
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Well, so it's a good question. The idea is fairly new, right? Because right now everybody with NFTs is all about like doing a cash grab, right? Like you want to, well, I mean that whole era is over, is over. But it was about doing cash grabs. When people came up with an idea, they try to get people to buy it, and they promise them they're going to build the metaverse or build all these kind of things. Of course, it was all nonsense, and nobody built any of that stuff that they said they were going to. Or if they did, nobody went and used it. So I think the way to think of it now, a good example is Alien Worlds. If you go to their website now, you can go find their lore Bible. And they took a lot of time to do it. It's like 100 pages of beautiful art with all the information about the different planets. There's 6 planets, and there's different alien races. And they have sort of rules about who they are, but it's not very specific. Like they don't have like who the government is, but they have this sort of more like the personalities and the history and the culture of all these different races. And they want people to come in and fill in the gaps. So we're doing a lot of that with our Starblind comic. And what I did is because there's nothing there, right? Except sort of a basic idea of alien worlds. So I decided to make my story happen within sort of what a prison colony that's on one of the planets. That way, if I screw it up really badly, it's only the whole thing can get blown up and it disappears, or something like that. Because there's a lot of experimentation while we're going to try to figure out like how to make this work and fit what we're doing into sort of the bigger world that other people will be developing with us. So I think a good way to find out about tokenized lore, if you're interested in it, is just to go to Alien Worlds and read what they've written, kind of get an idea of what they've done and what they haven't done, and then check out and just sort of follow along what they're doing. So what's really interesting about Alien Worlds is that they have 6 different DAOs. Each DAO has coins that you can get, and these are sellable on Binance and all of these different cryptocurrency exchanges, and there's like tens of millions of dollars worth of stuff, and you can basically mine this stuff. You can get Alien Worlds tools and you can mine it. You can get these coins, or you can join one of the DAOs for one of the 6 planets. And it's just like real life. I mean, people fight with each other. They get really, because it's real money, right? Like if you're one of the 6 people, or maybe it's 5, it's either 5 or 6 people that's on one of these DAOs, you get like a salary. And so people try to get people to vote for them, and they try to accumulate more of their tokens so they can vote for themselves. And this kind of thing. If you're on the committee, then you get to allocate a certain amount of budget. So people then, for each of the 6 planets, there's budgets. So they have all this sort of money, real money, tens of millions of dollars embedded in this system, which is really exciting because, if Otherverse had something like that, that means you could somehow go, into Otherverse, and you could go start digging around in the 3D world. And if you could find gold. I mean, it's like real gold. You can pull it out and you have money, right? And what they've done is they don't have a game, right? Their game is kind of like a staking thing where you just buy their coins and you go push a button on the website to do the mining. What they're waiting for is somebody to build like a metaverse and attach it to it and turn this sort of underlying mining thing into a 3D world that is using their lore, right? And so that's why I thought they would be a really good partner for Otherverse, because there are 2 things that are very important. Like Otherverse doesn't have that economy, like it's sort of built in of this sort of actual tens of millions of dollars of value just sitting there waiting to be mined. And what's interesting is the founders that they stuck that money in there, and they can't get it. It's all in the blockchain, right? Nobody can get it out. They let it free, and now anybody can go and fight for it and try to get it, and that's what's really exciting about it.
I love the idea and the concept of that. And yeah, definitely I can see that there's some synergies there that we need to look into. And one thing I want to ask you about is integration of AI tools in tokenized lore. How can AI tools enhance the storytelling and involve fans in this creative process? Let's talk about that a little bit.
A lot of artists hate AI, right? They feel very threatened by it. I use it every day in both the art part, I don't
Likewise.
usually refer to it as art. I call it images because I think art has to be done by a human being, but I call it AI images. But I use it all the time, and sometimes like I'll have one of our artists do a character, like all the characters behind me were all hand drawn, but I might put a background done by AI, and I'll just blur it. It just creates a texture, right? And that way the artist can I can spend more. I can have the artist do more characters, spend more time on the facial expressions. So these things are really important. They have to draw every detail in the background. It's a lot of extra work and expense, and they don't always want to do that. So a lot of them really love to draw the characters, and so I think that AI has a place, but I think for the most part, people people really are stuck on this idea of authenticity, right? Like, you really want stuff that is made by real people. They want to know who the artists are. They want to know who the founders of companies are. That trend is accelerating, right? In the old days, it didn't matter because everything was just corporations running stuff. But now there's more and more small businesses and individual creators that are doing things, and that's part of what is people are attracted to, is who these creators are and what their vision is. And so AI makes that very interesting because at the end of the day, I mean, if you're a brilliant creator of some kind, you could potentially use AI for all of your work to help you write, to help you create the images, but it's your artistic vision putting it together. The problem with AI art is it's one of these things where it's kind of like candy, where it looks really good when you first see it, but if you actually know art and design, you can't use it effectively to do anything that people actually want to read when it comes to comics. The expressions aren't there, all the little details of the characters, making them consistent enough, it's just not there. And so I think that for many reasons, artists don't really need to be afraid of AI, but I do think that it does give a lot of opportunities for people that want to create stuff that don't have drawing skills to be able to tell stories, create storyboards, and help build a world. But at the end of the day, you really need not just an artist, you really need people that really understand just the visual communication through images of different kinds to be able to tell stories effectively. Because there's all these deep little details you just wouldn't know about how about lighting and about certain things about how images work and how they impact our brains that make a big difference in how people react to it and whether people want to keep doing it. And comics are very hard. I mean, it's really well known that if you want to lose a lot of money and lose all your hair, go try to start a comic book company because almost nobody makes money. There's, in the United States, there's only 200 or so independent comic book producing companies, and I don't think really almost any of them make money. And what's interesting is that webtoons came out in Korea a few years ago, and now they have 1 million people making comics, as opposed to say 200 in the US. That the numbers are so much bigger because they made it so much easier. So to some extent, I think that AI will allow in the next step a lot of new creators to come and try to make comics and tell stories. But for the most part, most of it's going to be very low quality, and they just won't be effective. It takes many years, even with AI, to be able to tell a good story. And I've tried like have AI write stories for me, where I'll just give it a basic idea, and it's just absolute crap, and it just can't. But it can be good for some things. Like like if I need something funny, I'll ask it to write me 20 different jokes. I'll give it the entire script and say, I need a joke right here, like write something hilarious, and give me 20 of them, and then every once in a while it'll get something that'll actually be good enough that I can use it or modify it and stick it in there. Sometimes it makes me laugh just because it's so bad, or because I'm surprised that AI can write something that's actually funny sometimes. So I use it a lot, but you can't have it write like a story. It just has to be a tool, and most of what it does is it's a lot of sifting through stuff, but it's very good for sort of accelerating your creativity. Um, and it's also really good for historical stuff. Like I'm writing things now that are set in like the Philippines 200 years ago. I know very little about that, and it would be very difficult to do all the research. So I ask ChatGPT, like, what's a good name for a captain, a pirate captain, what have you been called? And or I'll ask like, what type of, I'll ask them to give me like 2 paragraphs about the pirates and about that time. And then I'll have it give me a name and this kind of thing. And it's really useful to do that. Because then I'll go check using Google to see if it's accurate to make sure. And I like things to be historically accurate to a large extent. And so it's so useful for that.
And that's where your science comes in. I actually have a question that came in from the from one of the theaters. We have quite a few people who are very, very new to crypto, and this question is a valid one. You were mentioning DAOs. What is a DAO? And I just thought I'd
Okay,
ask
so
that for those who don't know.
yeah, so DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So it means a lot of things to different people. Some people think of it as a panacea for all the world's problems. In reality, DAOs don't work very well. But the idea is that you don't really want to have a dictator in charge of something. And so the idea is let's put a DAO in charge, and then anybody that wants to can be part of the DAO. And the people that have a lot of energy and passion for it sort of get themselves elected in the DAO. And DAOs have different rules. So you might say, okay, we're going to have 5 different people. The elections are going to be every every quarter, and you get 1 vote for every token you have. So the more people invest, and then have more skin in the game, they get more of a vote, right? And so they can then elect the people they want, and if those people screw up, then every 3 months they can be kicked out, and other people can come in. And they sort of set up the rules, and all this is on the blockchain. So once it gets set, it can't be changed basically because it's unstoppable. It becomes unstoppable code, and there's no, you can't censor it. It transcends governments. It's anybody in the world can participate. All you have to do is own some of these tokens, and anybody can get them, right? So it's completely inclusive. So it solves a lot of the problems, but the reality is it's really hard because it just takes a lot of people's time. It's anytime you have more than 2 people, you start having politics, and the bigger these DAOs get, the more sort of politics you have. And so like I've seen DAOs where they have like 30 people on them, right? And like everybody wants to join the DAO because it's the cool thing. It's like, oh, they're going to do this DAO, and there's a lot of money behind it. They're going to be able to give out all these grants, and everybody's really excited. All these people just jump in because of like FOMO, right? They're hearing like, oh, it's the fun thing to do for this new project. I'm going to join the DAO too because all my friends are in it, but they don't really want to put in the work, right? But they just sit there. And then sometimes it'll be in the code that the DAO requires, say, a quorum of a certain percentage, like at least half the people vote, but half the people aren't even participating. So you can never get the vote at all, right? And it gets very frustrating. And so these kind of DAOs, it's a technology. I think of it as a technology, and it has a lot of work to do. And as far as making them useful, and they're not a panacea. They work really well in certain circumstances. It depends so much on who's in them. At the end of the day, I think there's no substitute for kind of charismatic leadership. People that really are passionate. They're good people that love what they're doing, and then inspire the people around them and are willing to put in the time and the hours. And that's what I'm trying to do with what I'm doing, right? And I try not to go and just join DAOs just because everybody else is, because unless you really want to participate. And so, yeah, that's kind of what a DAO is. And it's interesting. Some people think of it as like the ultimate in freedom. Other people think of it as the opposite. It's kind of like the ultimate in communism, and that it's like anybody can do it and everybody's equal and nothing gets done. And so it depends on the DAO. So I think it's like anything else. It really amplifies human fallibility. And so if you don't have good people involved, it's just a big mess.
Got it. Thank you. I have another question. Actually, this is a question from me. We kind of touched upon decentralized ownership of IP, and how it contrasts with like traditional ownership like Disney. And it seems very cool. Like I think it's a wonderful idea. But then I'm thinking about it a little bit more, and I'm like, well, what are some of the negatives about that? And there has to be, like, what are some of the hardships? What are the hard
Oh
things?
yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
difficult. Like for example, okay, so let's say let's say I like Anastasia is the name of my vampire character that we're just talking about with the bullet, right? And so, what if I sold 100 NFTs to anybody that wanted to create Anastasia stories, and then somebody starts making pornographic stuff, right? I don't know who they are because they're 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 anonymous. They bought a token. They can do what they want now. That's what the contract says. So you have to figure out how to deal with this. And it's, if it's just pornographic, it's fine. But what if they start doing child porn, right? And now they're damaging your brand. You don't know who they are. And the government comes to you and says, well, you sold them the token. It's your responsibility, Geoff, to police these people, even though the technology is not designed for that, right? It's designed to be non-censorable and anonymous. And that's part of the beauty of it, right? But there's always people that come and abuse things, right? And so there's different solutions, but one solution is not censorship, but just using the front end. So the idea is that if somebody goes and creates some content that is either illegal or you don't want it as part of your universe, or just it's not canon, or it's really crappy, you don't want people reading it because it's just not right, or it's really bad quality, then from the front end you can just not point people to it. If you're building the sort of the library of what people can see, then you can just not include it. But it's still there on chain. So if somebody else wants to get some other piece of software or go somewhere else, they can have access to everything that's on the blockchain and in IPFS. So that's actually a good way to do it, because that way you can create something where there's no censorship, but you can still curate the content in such a way that people that you want um, to see your stuff, the way you think it needs to be presented, you can do that. But at the same time, if somebody did buy that token and wanted to make pornographic Anastasia stories, they can do that, and I can't stop them, because that gives artists a lot of freedom. One person's pornography is another person's art, and and giving artists that kind of freedom that want to push the edge of things, especially with having to do with democracy. And there's a lot of countries in the world where they throw you in jail for saying things that they don't want you to say, and so that's why there's the power of anonymity and not being censored are really valuable. So there's solutions to this. And the hard part is just there are a lot of bad people out there that just will take advantage, and they'd like to troll. If they see something that's really cool, they think it's fun to go and wreak havoc and make a mess of it and make people run around and try to fix stuff. I always think of it as like people, that go and pee on toilet seats in public bathrooms. They think it's funny, that somebody's got to clean that up, and there's unfortunately too many of them. Even if it's only 2% of the people, that's still out of, like, in the United States, 350 million people. That'd be 7 million people with that kind of troll attitude, right? And there's a lot of people that can wreak a lot of havoc. And there's even more on the internet. And when you give people anonymity, it doubles again. So so there's a lot of that, and you have to figure out ways to police it. And that's one thing a DAO can do, right? Is you can have a DAO that helps filter all that stuff, so the founder doesn't have to spend their time trying to police all of this kind of stuff, and decide what gets created and what doesn't. So of course, the
Definitely.
moment you give power to a DAO, then you've got all the politics. So
Right.
so,
But that definitely sounds familiar when it comes to
yeah,
stuff with the
yeah.
community virtual world. I can't believe where the time is going. We've only got about 6 minutes left in this talk. So I want to kind of move towards wrapping it up a little bit here and just discussing the future of tokenized lore and where you see everything headed, where you would like to see things headed, and what your hopes are.
Well, I think that what's going to happen is that something, maybe it's alien worlds or maybe it's something else, somebody's going to hit really big with this. Some creator, like I saw an interview with the creator of Minecraft. He sold Minecraft to Microsoft for $2 billion or something like this, and he said it was the worst mistake of his life. He was talking about being, he's a billionaire now. He's hanging out with celebrities in Ibiza. He was mentioning all the people that were at this party he was in, and he was so bored, and he just hated he hated every moment of it. Like most people would think this is like success, right? But to him, what he loved was creating Minecraft and building on Minecraft, and and everybody convinced him that he needs to sell this to Microsoft and be a billionaire, and that's the dream, but that wasn't his dream. His dream was being creative, building Minecraft, and it was too late. He sold it. He couldn't get it back, and so I think that that's a really important lesson with all this. And so I think that somebody's is going to come along that owns one of these really big IPs and is going to tokenize their world, and instead of selling out to one of the big entertainment companies, like, because that was your only option before. When you get tired of it, you either sell it out, or if you're like the Japanese manga and anime creators, they close it. They say, okay, this is the end of the story. I'll go do something else. The people in America don't do that. They always just keep it going forever, and then until it's ruined, or they sell it to a big company to ruin it, right? But in Japan, that's like a part of the honor system. Like, no, you close your story down. It's with respect to your fans, and that's why manga and anime is so popular right now. Is because people are realizing that there's this deep level of respect that the creators of manga and anime have for their characters, for their stories, for their fans, and for their legacy that's missing, I think, in the West. That's one thing I've really committed to with our stories, is that I want to take the manga anime approach, and that I'm really committed to doing right by our readers, by our fans, and the characters themselves in these worlds. So I think that something really big they'll learn about this and they'll want to do it. They'll realize, being a billionaire, being super wealthy is not really the goal. It just creates more problems. And when you become really famous, and then everybody wants your time, and you can't trust anybody, it's really nice to have enough money, but not so much that people are trying to get it from you. And so giving this to, creating something beautiful and giving it to your fans and letting them run with it, somebody's going to do it, and it'll be really successful. They'll end up being thousands and thousands of people. I mean, there already are. If you look at like Roblox, right? There's thousands of millions of people that are building stuff in Roblox and participating. It's just not put together with lore, and that's what they're really missing. And so there'll be something that comes along like Roblox, but has a consistent lore with an anchor story, like the Star Wars trilogy, that kind of anchors the whole thing together, that people are passionate and that want to be part of building that world. That'll come along, and that'll change everything, because once they see that you can be really successful and people love that, all the big corporations are going to be like, oh, how can I do this? How can I do this? They're going to want to do that with some of their IPs. And I was talking with some of the people that own Heavy Metal, which is one of my favorite magazines. Like in high school, I loved Heavy Metal magazine. They did a movie, and they have all these IPs, right? And so somebody like that will come along and say, you know what, we're going to build a universe that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories that are just only like 10 pages in these magazines, and they'll put them all together in a universe, and then let other people come along and develop those and get paid for it. Something like that will happen. I think it'll happen soon, but there's a lot of technology and legal structure that needs to be built first, so that to make all of that viable.
Yeah, I don't know where the time went. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and this amazing, amazing talk today about tokenized lore. You've got 2 minutes. I love that. You've got 2 minutes. Any last words that you want to share with everybody? How can they find you? How can they check everything out? Let everybody know everywhere that we're.
Well, I would love to have people join us. I would actually just checked my email. I never look at email anymore, but there's an email from some of the people at Otherverse saying, hey, let's make a comic book store in Otherverse for Lightning Works, right? Which is something I think will be really cool. So hopefully we'll do that, and you'll be able to come in and buy our comics there. And I mean, the way I envision it, you'll be able to, in 3D, actually flip through the pages of the comic books, right? And our comics they have, like, every page has its own individual soundtrack to set a mood, and it's like 20 to 30-second loop. A lot of the pages are animated. They can be interactive, so you can click things and it happens.
We can do that.
Yeah, it's really cool. So that's what I want to do. I want with Otherverse to make I would love it if when people go into that original place, that Lightning Works is one of those things, right, where people can choose it, and then they can go in and see a comic book store. And I would like to do it where all the creators around the world can start putting their comic books in there, and you can pick them up and look at the covers and hold it as a 3D object. And we've done a lot of sort of tests with this kind of stuff, and I think it's a great use for for metaverse and how we can combine with comics. So please come and follow, just follow our socials, Lightning Works, and we're going to be releasing Starblind. It's really good. I think the comics are really good, and it's 45 pages of story and then another 15 pages or so of different cool stuff. Within the comic, you can get free NFTs. We have this thing called Gum, which is going to be the world's largest NFT set, and it's 30 tiers of gum. There's a whole story about this character that creates this gum. You'll see. It's something nobody's ever done before. That's really kind of crazy. Everybody thought it was crazy when I first said it, but now I'm starting to see the genius behind my madness when it comes to this crazy gum idea.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Thank you so much, Geoff. Thank you. We look forward to visiting Lightning Works in Otherverse, and we will see you very soon inside the world.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Guys, stay tuned. In 10 minutes, we're going to be having our next panel here, right here at 4 p.m., the Xeon Dev panel, Development in Xeon. So if you have any of your questions about development in the world, it's going to be right here. Come armed with your questions. There's going to be a little show and tell. There's going to be a lot of Q&A, and you're going to get a chance to speak with the lead developers on Xeon Otherverse. So we'll see you in 10 minutes.